Hello, my name's Rob Edwards, and it's only my podcast. Welcome back, one and all, to another episode of Storycast Rob, and yes, this is a second month in a row that I've successfully recorded something for the podcast. I hope you're as excited about it as I am. This is going to be my second chapter of Improbable Cause. Again, some of you may have heard some of this before, because it is a retelling, a restructuring of the previous version of it. But we'll be getting into fresh, brand new stuff next month, so no fear. In fact, I say next month, but it's worth noting that either next month or possibly the month after, I will be taking a short break from Improbable Cause to read to you my story from the next Inklings Press anthology, Tales from Alternate Earths 3. We're getting really close to having that ready now. Most of the editing has been done on the stories, but we have got some formatting still to do, and all of the other stuff that goes into getting ready to launch the book. So I don't know if it'll be ready for June, but it might be ready for July. So hopefully I will be able to read you my story from that fairly soon now. But that's not what we're here today for. We're here today to read the second chapter of Improbable Cause. Not a great deal to say in terms of preamble. I'm not going to try accents, I guess is the one message. It's the one thing that I do want to say about this. I will still try and do a little bit of a voice for Chanyo, but there is a character we're about to meet who is South African. There is a female doctor who is Dutch in this piece as well. I'm not going to try any of these accents. It's just better for all concerned that I don't. With that said, let us get down to the story, and this is Chapter 2. Consciousness returned grudgingly. He was horizontal, lying on a firm couch, but with a crinkle of paper between his back and the couch surface. The smell of disinfectant and rigorous cleanliness stabbed his nostrils, and the only sounds in the room were the tapping of a keyboard and the soft soaring of an anacro snoring. Duncan was reluctant to open his eyes. First, he tested his fingers, twitching them in turn. They didn't feel broken, though the memory of the pain of breaking them was still sharp. No pain at all now, though, beyond the thickness to his thoughts. If he'd split his skull open, there should have been more. He risked opening his eyes, just a crack at first, and when that didn't feel uncomfortable, all the way. He was in a blue-green exam room, presumably still in the med centre. His shirt was open and 3 sensor pads were stuck to his chest. He could feel 2 more on his temples. To his right, Chanyo was dozing in a chair. Across the room, a heavy-set black guy in nursing scrubs was working at a computer. Duncan cleared his throat. "Hey, what happened?" Chanyo stirred, looking up, relieved. The nurse turned and smiled broadly. "Welcome back, Dr. Bliss. How are you feeling?" His accent wasn't Dutch. Australian, maybe? South African? "Duncan, buddy, you scared the chirp out of me. Are you okay?" "I don't know. I feel okay, I think. A bit dizzy, maybe." "What happened?" The nurse stepped over to the exam room sink to wash his hands before dealing with Duncan. "No injuries from your tumble," he said. "Well, you gave your friend here a bit of a shock." "Too right," said Chanyo. He gave a low whistle of dismay, feathers on his brow ridge fluttering. "1 minute you were fine, the next you were out like a light. If I hadn't caught you... But I did." "Thanks." "I don't know, There was a noise, a loud noise, a rushing sensation." The nurse took Duncan's wrist, one eye on his watch. "Pulse is steady now," he said. "I'm Michael, by the way. I need to let the doctor know you're back with us. She'll have some questions for you, I'm sure. In the meantime, may I take your blood pressure?" Sure." Michael wrapped a cuff around Duncan's arm. "Did you note any strange smells before you fell over?" Michael asked. "Any odd tastes?" "Nothing like that. Ow!" The blood pressure cuff squeezed. Sorry. It's fine. No, just the noise. Like lots of voices all shouting at once. The nurse tutted at the readout on the meter. A little high, but that could just be the excitement. My BP runs low normally. On the low end of average, anyway. Is his temperature okay? Asked Chanio. I've always worried that his red hair makes it look like his head is on fire. Perhaps it's cooked his brain. Not helping, said Duncan. You two work together? Asked Nurse Michael, washing his hands again. I let him watch what I do, said Chanio. See if he can be taught. We're safety engineers for the Eagle stations, corrected Duncan. I keep things running safely. He tries not to molt feathers into anything important. Wow, that's pretty exciting. The med centre is the closest I'm like to get to heading topside. I'd love to see it sometime. Well, maybe you will, said Duncan. Projections suggest that space tourism is getting cheaper every year. By 2030, it might even be considered a normal holiday destination. And what a safety nightmare that would be. But maybe he'd retire before then. Could he retire in his 40s? Cool. I'll let the doctor know you're set to see her, said Nurse Michael. The door swung closed behind him. Thanks for catching me, Chanio. Any time, buddy. Though, try not to make a habit of it. You better hurry if you're going to make the launch. Ah, it's fine. I'll wait for you. We can take the later shuttle, if it comes to it. Duncan shook his head, tentatively but definitively. No, you head up. I can't follow you for at least 48 hours now. You know the regs. You advised on that chapter, as I recall. Any undiagnosed medical conditions, I'm grounded for at least that long. The medical facilities topside were state-of-the-art, but finite. It was a long way to send a patient if complications ensued. It was safer by far to keep any unexplained medical problems as far from the Eagles as possible. Everybody was scanned before going up. That's why they'd been coming to the SCSH in the first place. It was Regulation 1 and very sensible to Duncan's mind. Chanio sagged. Yeah, okay. I'll try not to make space perfectly safe before you get a chance to come up and join me. Appreciate it. And if the terrazine regulator doesn't cooperate, hit it with a hammer or something. Can do. Duncan returned to the small flat he maintained in Amstelveen on the outskirts of Amsterdam. The rent was expensive for a tiny box of a place, but he could afford it, and he went up often enough it was useful to have a place for layovers. He couldn't always rely on Chanio booking a hotel. He kept a supply of tinned and dry food in the kitchenette at all times, which he supplemented with milk and bread from a shop near his local tram stop. He placed his overnight bag back on the rack in the hallway, then poured himself a carefully measured serving of muesli. He sat in his armchair and stared at the wall. The doctor had been cautious by a whole day. If Duncan had no more symptoms in 72 hours, and if the bloods that were sent to the lab came back clear, then he would be cleared to head topside again. It was the right call. On one level, Duncan approved. On one level. The problem was, he didn't know what had set off the episode this morning. It could have been something as simple as low blood sugar. But what if it was something more serious and long-lasting? What if he never got to go up again? Space travel was still a rarity for most of the population. If you didn't have business on the Eagle, at Tranquility, or on one of the Anacro ships, you didn't go up. That would be... He didn't want to think about the possibility. He would, though. When faced with a potential risk, that was the only thing Duncan knew to do with it. He wouldn't starve, at least. His expertise was in demand. He could run lectures, write books. He'd been approached by corporations looking for consultants and non-executive board members on many occasions. He would still earn comfortably, more than comfortably. He could give up the Amstelveen flat in a heartbeat and base himself entirely out of his house in Aberdeenshire. But working in space had been his dream for as long as he could remember. He would spend hours as a child poring over textbooks, watching videos, TV shows, films, anything space-related. He was too young to have lived through First Contact, but he watched the famous video of it so many times as both a child and an adult. When mankind went to the moon, the Anacro were there to meet them. Armstrong left the capsule, delivered the first of the 2 lines history remembered him for, then turned, saw the Anacro, and in surprise delivered his second, more famous and less scripted line. Duncan repeated it now. It summed up his mood nicely. To be grounded. To never go up again? By the end of the first 24 hours, Duncan had mapped out the plans. The first plan, Plan A, covered what to do if the doctor determined he was permanently grounded, but the ailment was not immediately life-threatening. He'd drawn up a list of real estate agents who could help sell his Dutch flat, shortlisted the contacts he would approach for establishing a solid earnings base, drafted letters to lawyers, insurance, and a proposed list of charities that might support illness like the one he may or may not have. Plan B was an addendum to his already established death planning. If his episode was the first sign of a degenerative brain disorder, he needed to refresh his living will, identify candidates for power of attorney, and revisit the final disposal of his assets. He knew that some people would call this approach morbid, but it just seemed practical to him. It wasn't like he wanted either of these cases to be borne out. At the 48-hour mark, Duncan leapt on his phone when it rang. "Duncan Bliss," he said. "Hello, Doctor. It's Dr. Van Schendel from the SCSH. "Good morning, Doctor. Good to hear from you. Any news on my test results?" Duncan straightened his hair, despite the call being voice only. That was probably for the best. His little flat was strewn with papers, as he'd spent the last day coming up with plans C through K. It was just possible that he was beginning to spiral, with nothing productive to do. "Yes. I'm pleased to say that everything looks fine from our end. How have you been feeling? Any further episodes? Headaches? Dizziness?" "Nope," Duncan snapped. I've been fine. Nothing unusual here at all. Not at all. How are you?" "I'm fine, Dr. Bliss." "Well, good then. If nothing further develops in the next 24 hours, report back here tomorrow and we'll get you cleared to head topside again." "Thank you, Doctor. That's excellent news." Duncan tended to live a regimented, predictable life. For 24 hours he took that to the extreme. He exactly calculated and consumed the recommended calorie intake with precisely balanced nutritional value, engaged in vigorous but not excessive physical exercise, monitoring his heart rate at all times. He meditated, engaged in mindfulness techniques, eschewed alcohol, kept his planning mania under control by directing it to that day's activities instead of 1,000 what-ifs. He retired to bed early enough to get the required amount of sleep, and if he had some trouble falling asleep, he had set his alarm late enough to compensate for that eventuality. When he arrived back at the Schiphol Centre for Space Health the next morning, half an hour early, he was as relaxed, calm, and ready as he could be. He took the lift to the 3rd floor. Dr. Van Schendel didn't keep him waiting. She took his vitals, asked him if there was any problems. Duncan answered truthfully. The doctor cleared him for a flight once more. Duncan and Chanio walked along the outside of Eagle Station 4, magnetic boots clamping and unclamping as they progressed, safety tethers sliding along the railings. Above them, the earth loomed.
"The hammer didn't work, then?"
asked Duncan.
"I don't know what to tell you, buddy. In the face of all logic, all it did was dent the housing a bit."
Duncan paused, his own breathing loud inside his helmet.
"I'm just checking. You didn't actually..." "No, of course not."
The stark white hull of the station shone in the sunlight. Beyond, the blackness of space, detail eclipsed by the brightness of the earth above. Duncan looked up. His home planet seemed to fill the sky, 7 billion humans and a few thousand Anacro hanging above his head, a blue marble wreathed in a tumble of clouds.
I can't lose this, Chanio,
he said.
Look at it. We're in an age of wonders. I can't get trapped down there. Up there. There. Try not to lose your tiny mammalian mind, buddy. But your moon's rising at our 6.
Chanio chuckled.
Well, thank you to keep your species a little to yourself, Feathers,
Duncan said, but he spared a glance towards the moon's edge peeking out from behind the earth.
Come on, we'd better take a look at that terrazine regulator. Sure, but I think we're just going to have to replace the whole thing.
They moved on, one careful, heavy step after the next. Once they reached the unit, Duncan secured his safety tether to a stationary loop, then turned off the mag on his boots. Holding the housing, he pivoted with practiced ease until his orientation matched the unit. He undid the toggles on the housing and swung it open.
And you still can't tell me what it's part of?
Duncan asked.
Sorry, buddy. There's still some tech humans aren't quite ready for. I can tell you what the component does, but not what the system as a whole is for. No need. I mean, it's clearly monitoring some form of energy propagation, and this emitter here, it can boost the field locally if the energy field isn't quite doing what you want, right? It must be pretty esoteric energy. Low level? Pervasive? Harmless? For the most part, yes. Like water, a glass can be good for you, but diving into an ocean can be dangerous. But the background level, if anything, it's beneficial.
Duncan studied the unit carefully. The schematics never told the whole story. You had to look at the thing in situ to really understand it. It was an anomaly. Almost nothing was pure anachro design these days. Even tech that had started life with the aliens had been adapted, altered, often improved by human scientists and engineers. To see something in the pure state was more than unusual. It was, well, alien. Even now, Duncan could see a few changes he'd make to improve the overall layout of the design, if nothing else. It was inelegant.
Well, the good news is I don't see that it's affecting the safety of the station. The fault seems to be primarily in the emitter function, and I guess it's not able to properly synchronize with the energy wave. When it tries, the monitors detect the error and shut it down again. After a few seconds, the whole process repeats. That's why we're seeing the stuttering on the energy requirements it was pulling. Right. Great. So that's us then. Safety impact assessed. We can hop back inside and report,
said Chanio. He sounded subdued, though, disappointed.
We can, but... No buts, buddy, not today. You know the regulations. Neither of us are cleared to be mucking with this thing. We're just here to do an impact analysis.
But he could fix it. He knew he could. Even in a circuit type he'd never seen before, it was obvious that one of the components had shorted and burnt out. There were scorch marks around it.
I can bypass the damaged component easily enough. There looks to be redundancy. Just leave it, Duncan.
Duncan tapped a component, colour-coded blue.
What's this? Is it safe to take it out of the circuit for a few seconds?
If Chanio answered, he didn't hear. Duncan's own breathing was too loud in his ears, his heart thumping over it. A rushing, roaring sound. The edges of his vision darkened. Got to prove that I'm still useful, can't?
I'm doing it,
Duncan said. He reached out and pulled the blue component out of the circuit. The regulator exploded, tearing Duncan's suit to shred.
I'm doing it,
Duncan said. He reached out and pulled the blue component out of the circuit. The regulator exploded, tearing Duncan's suit to shreds.
I'm doing it,
Duncan said. He reached out and pulled the blue component out of the circuit. The regulator exploded, tearing Duncan's suit to shreds. Duncan hesitated.
You're probably right, Chanio.
I'd better not mess with it?
Good call, buddy.
What the hell was that? What just happened? And there we have it, the end of Chapter 2 of Improbable Cause. When we revisit next month, or the month after, depending on when the other story comes out, we will be moving on to Chapter 3. How very exciting. In the meantime, thank you all for joining me. I hope you had fun with that, and I will catch you next time. Thanks for listening, and check out my YouTube channel for more odds and ends. Last week I put a piece up about my favourite superhero team, the Legion of Superheroes, and give that a listen if you're interested. Thank you for listening.